Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of GOAT Movies, the podcast for the simple movie lover, where we discuss movies we've recently seen and see if they have what it takes to become the next greatest of all time. What makes a GOAT movie? Is it quotable? Is it lovable? Is it any-able? You'll find that out today and more. Get your passports ready and your bulletproof vest, because today we're going south of the border. Today we're talking about Sicario, Day of the Soldado. On today's show, we've got one of my coolest movie buffs that I know, Andrew Greco. What's going on, Andrew?
Nothing much. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. You are the younger brother of a returning commentator, Nick Greco.
Nick.
What was it like growing up with Nick?
It was pretty cool. You know,
Really?
always got along. Nothing, whatever.
He's not around to give you a wedgie or to give you crap, okay? So you can really be honest here.
Nah. If anything, I was the one that broke his arm whenever I was like 3 years old.
Oh, wow. I'm sure that's a story I'd love to hear next time that we get together. No, but just kidding. We really do love Nick here. We love all of you guys joining us here on the show. On today's show, we're going to be talking about Sicario, Day of the Soldado, which is the sequel to the original Sicario. What's great about this movie is it's got the original cast, Benicio del Toro as Alejandro, Josh Brolin as Matt Graver, and a couple of new faces. We've got Isabella Moner as Isabel Reyes, and Jeffrey Donovan as Steve Forsing. Basically, the drug war on the U.S.-Mexico border has escalated as the cartels have begun trafficking terrorists across the U.S. border. To fight the war, federal agent Matt Graver reteams with Mercurial Alejandro. Before we get into the movie, I just want to get to know you a little bit more, Andrew, and I want to let the audience know exactly who you are and give them a little bit about your background. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I am actually a filmmaker. I've been a filmmaker for probably the past 8 years in a really small capacity, like nothing that you've probably ever heard of or whatever. Mainly just a lot of freelance stuff, commercial, industrial videos, like corporations want to do like interviews with their CEO, like stuff like that. Like me and my friends are usually the ones that shoot videos like that. We've got our own production company called Negative Apples. We do short films and whatnot, music videos, whenever we get a chance to do the creative stuff that we really want to do. But in the meantime, we do all of the corporate stuff that nobody really wants to do, just so we can afford to pay the bills and pay for the creative stuff that we want to do later on. And so that's pretty much what we do in our free time, is just make movies. I'm primarily a director of photography in production, and in post-production, I am the editor.
Awesome. So you do a lot of work behind the camera.
Yes. So pre-production, you got to do all of the planning, the location scouting, got to figure out if we need any equipment, like if we've got to rent lights and whatnot. But in production, I am the director of photography, which means I am responsible for the image that is captured on the camera. So the director will say, this is what I want it to look like. And as the director of photography, it's my job to figure out how to realize that image, that like imaginary image in his head. I have to figure out how to get that look in camera.
Cool deal. Well, it sounds like you are starting from the bottom and working your way up. You're way ahead of me, that's for sure. But it sounds like you're just following your passion for cinema, as am I with this, little podcast. So definitely hope to have you on the show a couple more times before you make it too big that you can't even take my phone calls.
Man, even then, I'll still come on the podcast. I don't care about that crap. When we're not working about crap, all we're doing is talking about movies. It's what we do. We love movies. So just any chance to talk to people who love talking about movies, I just take that chance.
Awesome. Well, we definitely appreciate it. As mentioned earlier, we are talking about Sicario, Day of the Soldado. This movie is, I would say a little over 2 hours long. And like I said, it's got the original main cast, Josh Brolin as Agent Matt Graver and Benicio del Toro as Alejandro. This was a movie directed by Stefano Sollima. Let's just go ahead and get our rating system right out of the way. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely horrible, not worth even bootlegging, 10 being the absolutely best movie, hit all the markers that you want, definitely going to go down and withstand the test of time. You have 0.5 that you can give as you please. Where do you rate this movie?
This one's kind of tough for me because I tend to be a lot more critical for movies, but this one actually really surprised me. I'd probably put it up at around. I would probably give it an 8. Actually, it's a pretty solid 8 for me.
That's actually a pretty good score. I'm also going to score this movie an 8. Did you by any chance see the original?
Oh, the original is one of my favorite movies of all time.
And seeing as this is a sequel to the original, you think that your 8 score is withstanding the stigma or the negative connotations that come with sequels?
Absolutely. It really surprised me. So, like, to be completely honest, I really was not interested at all to see this movie, mainly because it seemed like it was going to be an unnecessary sequel to, an amazing movie. It seemed almost like, me being really cynical, it almost seemed like it was just like a cash grab. They were just like, oh, we've got this awesome movie, Sicario. People seem to like it. And literally, like 3 days after Sicario came out, they announced that they were going to make a sequel. And I just gave the biggest facepalm. Like, why does that movie need a sequel?
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. The original had Emily Blunt in it and just a couple of other names, but the main characters would be Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. Now, one thing that we have to know about Benicio del Toro, I would have to say that Benicio del Toro is not one to just take willy-nilly roles. He's very particular as far as the scripts that he decides to portray and the characters that he plays. I was actually pretty shocked when I found out that he was in the latest Star Wars movie. I think his character there was a little out of place and not one of his best roles. But when I found out that they were doing a sequel and that Benicio del Toro was going to be in it as his original character, that's really what intrigued me. When I first saw Sicario, the original, me being an El Paso native and the movie primarily taking place in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, I was actually born in Ciudad Juarez. I was, more into it as, oh, where are they? Oh, I know where that street is. Oh, yeah, I know that place. I know exactly where they're filming. And it was just more of a going back to my roots kind of thing, which is what attracted me to the first one. And the second one, I really wanted to see where they took the story with it. I'm not a big fan of sequels, but I'd have to give this movie an 8 because they nailed it. They did a pretty good job bringing back the characters. Emily Blunt's character was not in this one, and I honestly think that if they had brought back Emily Blunt's character, I think this movie would have taken a turn for the worst.
They announced fairly early on that she would not be returning, and I was almost like, oh, well, because it's a sequel, it's like she's not under contract, and she's like, I've got better things to do than a sequel or whatever. But the reason she actually didn't come back is because I can't remember if it was the director or the screenwriter. It may have been a combination of both. But they decided in the original Sicario, she was kind of the moral center of it. She was the one that kind of tried to keep her humanity throughout the movie. And the director and screenwriter for this movie basically said, yeah, we don't want a moral center. We want everything to be horrible in the sequel. And so I was like, you know what? I can kind of respect that. I can kind of, at least they're trying to go in a different direction.
Yeah.
With it.
One thing that I will say about this movie that I didn't really understand until the very end, I saw them jumping around a lot, and I'm not one for one of those. Quentin Tarantino is very well known for this, jumping around different scenes, different locations, different time frames. And while I was watching this movie, I found it very difficult in the beginning to kind of keep track of the storyline and, okay, who are we talking about here and where are we now? But it all kind of tied back together at the very end, much like Quentin Tarantino's style. There was a lot of action, lots of blood, lots of gore, but not too much to make it distasteful. This movie really portrays the dangers of this whole Mexican cartel, the reality of it. What's really scary is, even you see this in scenes of the first one, is the lengths that some people will go to in order to accomplish a goal, be it morally or politically. And I think this director and this movie really did a great job because you have to admit, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but you have to admit or really think about if stuff like this truly does go on behind the curtains, are they moving these little chess pieces in order for political gain?
You got like the politicians and whatnot basically just sitting behind their desks waiting for something horrible to happen just so they can say, oh, this is our chance. This is how we convince people, like, this is how we're going forward with our agenda. I mean, it really is kind of like tinfoil hatty, but I mean, like, if you see it presented in a narrative way, the way they do in this movie, I couldn't tell you if it's like me being all tinfoil hatty or if the movie just pulled it off so well, but you could totally see something like this movie just happening in real life, just like the way they use their political agenda to move forward with whatever like the plan is. You could totally see something like this happening in real life. And I'm trying to be vague because I really don't want to give out any spoilers yet, just because from what I saw in the trailers, I had no clue what to expect going into this movie.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, because on Goat Movies we don't say anything without giving that spoiler alert.
Oh no, I'm huge on spoilers or whatever, so always try to be as vague as possible until we get to the spoiler alert.
Well, the great thing about this is that they stuck so close to the storyline in the first one that if you haven't seen the first one, I don't think it's 100% necessary for you to see the first one in order for you to see the sequel and be on top of everything. But they stuck so close to the storyline that it's definitely going to give you the advantage. One of those movies where you just kind of get to know the characters a little bit better know their background. But I mean, do you disagree? Do you really think that if you had gone into this movie without seeing the original, do you think that you would have been at a disadvantage or lost in any way, shape, or form?
Not necessarily, I don't think so, because really, in terms of the story, it really doesn't tie in as like a sequel in the way it would be like a continuation of the story. It's really just a continuation of the characters, but Day of the Soldado does a really good job at sort of reintroducing the main players from the first one without being like too redundant about it. It's not like because I saw the first one that I'm getting these reintroductions for the new the characters in this new story. It's not like, oh, we got to go through the same setup and the same origin story, like all of this. It's just kind of like they show up, and if you hadn't seen the first one, you really get a good idea who these people are. Like, especially the way they introduced Benicio del Toro's character in this movie, I thought was awesome, because it's just like so simple. He's just like walking home, but like he sees that something's wrong, and so he like sneaks into his apartment the back way just to get up. And so it's like, if you hadn't seen the first one and you don't know anything about this character, just the way he gets back into his apartment, it's just like, okay, this guy, you don't want to mess with this guy. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, just to make sure that we don't give out any spoilers, let's go ahead and listen to the trailer for this movie, after which we'll go ahead and play that spoiler alert, and we can definitely go into further detail. How about that?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, here you guys have it. Sicario, Day of the Soldado.
I know who you are. You're the attorney whose family they killed.
Not they.
My father.
Póntelos.
And now you hunt them.
Adios.
There's proof the cartel helped the terrorists get to the border.
The president's adding drug cartels to the list of terrorist organizations.
You can understand how that will expand our ability to combat them.
You want to see this thing through? I'm gonna have to get dirty.
Dirty is exactly why you're here.
You're gonna help us start a war.
With who?
Everyone. No rules this time.
Your objective is to start a war between the Mexican cartels, not with the Mexican government.
This girl was witness to the mission, correct?
Yes, sir.
We can't risk her falling into the wrong hands. Clean the scene.
They want me to cut ties. You gotta get rid of her.
I can't do that.
I Don't put me in that situation.
You gotta do what you gotta do.
I'm gonna need a strike team, 2 Blackhawks, drones with attack capability.
Where's the coup?
Mexico.
You have no reason to trust me. But trusting me is how you're gonna survive.
Good luck.
Luck doesn't live on this side of the border.
Sicario, Day of the Soldado. There you have it, rated R, 2 hours and 2 minutes long. Let's go ahead and issue that spoiler alert.
Red alert!
Anything beyond this point is fair game. If you haven't seen the movie and don't want the movie ruined for yourself, go ahead and pause the podcast now and be sure to come on back. Like I said, everything from here on out is going to go ahead and be fair game. Andy, let's go ahead and start talking a little bit more in detail about this movie. Right off the bat, you had mentioned a little bit about Benicio del Toro's character and, you know, how the manner in which he got back into his apartment. For those of you who don't know, Benicio del Toro is the Sicario, which is Spanish for hitman. And basically, he is walking home and Josh Brolin's character is contracted by the U.S. government to basically overthrow the cartels. And one key aspect in this whole movie is that they can't just necessarily kill the kingpin. They can't kill the head of the cartel because then you have the issue of who's going to take his place. And this isn't like your normal, you know, corporate world organization. These generals and colonels or whatever in these cartels are all going to be fighting for that top position. And now what you've done is you've killed the leader and now have issued an internal war as to who's going to take over. And then one cartel breaks off into 30 cartels. And so basically the government wants this issue taken care of, but they can't quote unquote be involved, which is why they hire Josh Brolin's character to kind of stage this coup between the two cartels, the two major cartels. The movie opens with these immigrants that are crossing the border, and they are apprehended by the border patrol, and one of them ends up basically blowing himself up and taking a couple of the agents with him. Then we cut to another scene that, you know, you've got these people that are walking into a grocery store. You see them strategically place themselves throughout the store, and all of a sudden they are human bombs and they start, you know, killing themselves and blowing up the store. There's mass mayhem. This scene, there was one scene, this right here, that really got to me. I don't know about you, Andrew, but it really upset me because you see this woman with her daughter and she's trying to make her way towards the front of the building, towards the exit. All you see is that there is this person standing in the middle of the door, you know, and he's hesitating, not wanting to push the button because he's got a bomb strapped to himself. And she's just like, honey, just stay close, just be very quiet, you know, and she keeps walking towards him to try to get out the door. And you see her kind of hesitate. I don't know about you, Andrew, but in that situation, I feel like, I guess we would never know what we would do in those situations. You know, we'd hope that we would do something. But in that situation, I don't think I'd play the hero, but I definitely wouldn't keep walking towards him trying to get out the door. I mean, the entire front of the building is glass. If anything, I would be walking further and further away from him. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I get what was going on, like, right there, because she was standing pretty much just right next to him. If she, like, tried to run the other way, he could have, like, blown her up anyway or whatever. I get what you're saying on that, but for me, this scene is kind of what made the movie for me, or it's what got me invested in the movie, because I was already really hesitant to see this movie just because I thought it was going to be, you know, just a cheap cash grab on a great movie, like an unnecessary sequel. And they didn't bring back the two main reasons I saw the original one, which were the original director and cinematographer. They didn't come back because they were working on other bigger things, and so they hired two other director and cinematographer. And so I was just kind of like, I mean, it's just going to be a sequel. But this is the scene which happens really early on. I mean, this is probably first 5-10 minutes of the movie. And this scene happens, and I was just kind of like, okay, these guys know what they're doing, because you have the whole scene that takes place in this grocery store, which jumps to Kansas City for some reason. They do a really good job at jumping back and forth at the very beginning, so you're not really sure what's going on until everything comes together. But the whole scene that takes place at this grocery store is one continuous shot. It's just a camera on a lateral dolly, I believe. And so the first three guys go in, and then they just blow themselves up in succession. So it's bang, bang, bang. And then the camera dollies over and focuses on these two survivors, a mother and daughter. And so you see them get up and they start to leave, but something stops them, and the mother just starts freaking out again for some reason, but you don't know what it is because we can't see it yet. And so when we follow her, we see that there's actually like a fourth suicide bomber. It's this really, really small moment, but in filmmaking, it's huge to have like a reveal like that off screen after something like that had happened. And so whenever this scene happened, I was like, okay, it turns out that these guys might know what they're doing, and this actually might be a pretty good movie. And that scene is the perfect setup for this kind of movie, because it's just the right amount of intensity and violence, but realistically to get you invested in the story, because this movie never really goes out of the realm of realism. I mean, the only really one major problem I had with the movie is really towards the end, that kind of stretches like your suspension of disbelief. And I think you know what I'm talking about, and we'll get to that.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely get to that. Exactly.
To that a little bit later, but yeah, this scene was this opening scene was just the perfect setup for this movie. And I mean, it's horrible what happens. It's about a suicide bombing, but to get you emotionally invested as to what happens next throughout the whole movie, I think it was a pretty necessary setup.
Absolutely. And you see all the mayhem going on in the background. You see all the patrons in the grocery store just gunning it in any which way that they can, just to, survive that basic instinct of survival. So it was a very emotional scene for me as well. And it definitely gets you invested as the viewer of this movie. You get invested in basically what's going on. On a side note, it's kind of subtle there. You know that this is going to get the American people's blood boiling, and you cut to a scene where I think it was like an attorney general or some sort of senator or something. He basically says that we get tested as a country and we come together and unite together as one whenever we're tested like this by terrorists. After the explosion in the grocery store, we cut to a scene where Josh Brolin is investigating one of the terrorists in Djibouti. What's really interesting is you've got this giant jug of water, and you've got this terrorist, and he's sitting there and he's just looking at the water, looking at Josh Brolin. And Josh Brolin's character says, you think I'm going to waterboard you for answers? Waterboarding is what we do when we can't torture you. I'm somewhere where that's not a problem. And you kind of see this guy kind of take a second look like, oh man, like I don't want to mess with this.
I done goofed.
Yeah. So Josh Brolin starts investigating and questioning him on who this person is. And, because these guys snuck into the country through Mexico, which means they had to have gotten to Mexico one way or another. And, through his investigation, he finds out that they got there to Mexico through a ship. And then from the ship, they got to Mexico. And from Mexico, they found a coyote. For those of you who don't know, a coyote is someone that you pay to cross you through the border. Where there are, tracks, and how to navigate through the desert and try and avoid the immigration, the border patrol. That, when you see that scene where you have all these immigrants who are just paying, $1,000 a head or $2,000, whatever these people charge, and you see like, what's the word? It's like not a plaza, but a flea market. And you've got all these buses and you've got people running back and forth. This is really what it's like. These people are really paying out the nose to pay these people to get them over to the country, get them across the border illegally. And, they'll try anything to get into America. And so, unfortunately, that's where you start running into, drug trafficking and human trafficking. And so all that is portrayed throughout the entire movie. As you had mentioned in the beginning, it's jumping around a lot, which it ties in at the very end, and it kind of makes sense. But for me, when I'm watching these types of movies, it makes it very difficult for me to try and focus on what's going on because they're jumping around so much. So I didn't really like the way that it was executed in the beginning because, like I said, you've got the Kansas City scene, you've got the grocery store scene, then we're in Djibouti, then we're back in Washington with Josh Brolin, who has since, trimmed his beard and is talking to the senators and, how are we going to address this and what's this bombing? Then we're talking about Mexicans and illegal immigration, and then all of a sudden we're talking about Muslims, and it was all just a little too confusing for me.
Yeah. And then they go to McAllen, Texas, and we're following around this little like middle schooler kid. He's got
Exactly.
He's got his own little side plot in there. And so it does jump around a lot. And I was really worried it was going to maintain like that much disjointedness throughout the movie. But fortunately, like around the end of the first act, once they've got the setup, it kind of scales back. And then you're basically just following Benicio del Toro and Josh Brolin's character and what they've got going on. And then every once in a while, we'll cut to this little kid that's in middle school in McAllen, and we're trying to figure out like what he's doing. And so it scales back the disjointedness after a while, but it was getting a little too much to handle at the very beginning. But like I'm trying to think of how else they could convey what the movie is about without doing that, because they've got this whole setup where it's kind of about terrorists, but not really. They're really just using the whole terrorist angle as an excuse to jumpstart their war on the cartel.
Exactly.
And so I'm trying to think of how they could have done that without jumping around so much. And I don't think, just off the top of my head, I can't think if they could have done it as effectively by like, trying to scale it back a little bit. So I think it was a necessary creative choice.
No, I understand where you're coming from on that. So one of the most interesting things that I thought throughout one of the quotes in the movie is, they ask Josh Brolin, do you know what basically they're talking to him and saying what makes the most money, back in the 80s and 90s. And he was talking about cocaine and how that was the biggest source of income for these cartels back in the day. And now in the early millennium to now, the highest source of income is human trafficking. And you hear about it on the news all the time about, all these busts and all these people that are crammed into semi trucks and stuff like that. And this is where they're really tying into the realism and really making you understand or connect with these characters because you see it in the news in real life all the time. So this is one of the points that I just have to give them major credit. And this is what really makes you, like you said, kind of tinfoil hatty, conspiracy theorist. Is this something that really goes on in everyday life, in politics? Is this really how they push their agenda? So to me, that was one of the most interesting facts about this whole movie. We then cut to a scene in Mexico City, and one of the drug cartel's daughters is fighting in the courtyard with another little girl, and she is really letting her have it. I mean, hair being pulled, scratches and everything, and she just starts punching her. All of a sudden, the headmaster and all the teachers, I guess, rip them apart, but I don't know. I kind of feel that it would have been better for me. I don't know about you, Andrew. I'm fluent in Spanish. I feel like that scene where he's talking to the two girls about what happened, to me, it would have been better if it had been done completely in Spanish. You've got this white teacher, and he's talking to the little girl, like, what did you do? And then she was like, well, she called me this or she called me that. And he goes, then that's when you need to let me take care of it. And then she just looks at him like, whatever. And then she actually says to him, oh, okay, so I should let you kick her ass? And he just looks at her like, that's not the way you handle things. And then she's being very disrespectful to him, and he says, I should have you expelled. And she says, go ahead, do it. The whole point being is that this girl is a little badass, or she thinks she is, because she knows who her father is. Everybody in the school knows who her father is, and she's not to be messed with.
Oh, no, yeah, her dad is cartel boss man. It's never explicitly said like which cartel or who he is or whatever, but in the scene prior to this, whenever when Josh Brolin and them are trying to figure out how to move forward with this like new excuse for a war that they have on the cartel, like immediately the senator that they're talking to is just like, let's just kill the boss. Let's just kill the boss. But Josh Brolin's like, no, you kill a boss to end a war. If you want to start a war, you kidnap a prince. And then it cuts to this girl beating the crap out of the girl in the courtyard. And so just through that, we get the implication that this girl is somebody who, A, you don't want to mess with the girl, and then B, you definitely don't want to mess with her dad.
Exactly. So the whole premise of the movie is that they are going to kidnap this little girl and make it seem like it was an opposing cartel who decided to kidnap the little girl and just basically set the cartels on a cartel war between each other. And so Josh Brolin's character knows how this needs to be handled, and he needs to involve his boy Alejandro, who is portrayed by Benicio del Toro. This takes us back to the beginning of the podcast where we were talking. Benicio del Toro is basically walking home, and he knows that something is out of place, and he just casually walks past the entrance to his building and goes up a back alleyway and decides to, climb the fire escape. And as he's trying to get into his home through a window, he notices that there's a little post-it that says, "I'm sitting in your living room, don't shoot me." And this really goes to show the chemistry or the connection that Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro had in this movie, because they've worked together so many times, not only in the original, but it kind of lays the foundation that this is not the first time that Josh Brolin, or the second time, or the third time, really, that, they've worked together enough that Josh Brolin knows exactly how Benicio del Toro works out. And later on in the movie, we find out that Benicio del Toro was selected for a reason and basically been groomed to be this insider for the U.S. government.
Yeah, and this little exchange that they have where he's sneaking up and there's already the post-it note on like the back entrance to his apartment. It's the perfect setup for these two characters, especially if you haven't seen the first one. It's just kind of like a little bit of icing on top if you have seen the first one, because it's like, hey, these two guys worked really cool together in the first one. But if you haven't seen it, it's just the perfect, simple way to introduce the relationship between these two characters. You've got this badass who senses something's wrong, and then he's just like, he's going to sneak into his apartment and get the drop on the guy, but there's the post-it note waiting for him, so it's like, oh, it's this dude again. What does he want now?
Yeah, absolutely. This reminded me a lot about the scene in the second Captain America movie where, Captain America is coming home from a long, hard day. He has that brief interaction with the nurse, and then she's like, "Oh, you left your music playing," and he knows that he didn't leave it. And then he sneaks into his own apartment, turns on the light, and finds out that Samuel L. Jackson is sitting in his living room.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It was kind of like that, that they basically know each other well enough to know what the other is going to do and or think.
Yeah, and it's kind of a trope. Now, a lot of movies do this sort of thing where it's like, oh, the badass knows that somebody's in his apartment, so he's got to be careful, so he goes in with his gun drawn or whatever. But the way, it's just almost like a punchline, because you see that Benicio del Toro knows that something's wrong, so he's, sneaking up the fire escape, he's going through, the back entrance, but there's just, this little post-it note that says, "Don't shoot me," that's just waiting for him, and it's just, I kind of had a little chuckle, because it's like, oh, and then he goes in, and it's Josh Brolin's character, and they start talking about what they're doing, and it was just a really, really cool way to reintroduce the relationship between these two characters for this new story.
Yeah, so basically Josh Brolin lays out the plan for them and decides on what they need to do. At this point, basically, one of the cartels that they're going after is the cartel that's responsible for killing Benicio del Toro's family in the original movie, and basically going back to his roots and why he's doing what he's doing. And this guy's supposed to be the best hitman that there ever was. So then we cut to a scene where I guess he's a politician or an important Mexican official leaving his office building. Benicio del Toro goes after them, big blow up scene, shoots the guy's trying to run away. Benicio del Toro and his team all have ski masks on, and this portly fellow is trying to run away. He shoots him in the leg, and for all intents and purposes, he is trying to get away, when in reality, this would have never happened. I mean, if he shot him in the leg, that guy would have been down, but he still kept going and going. Anyways, he drops his glasses, gets to him, gives him his glasses, and goes, "Please, put him on," because Benicio del Toro wanted this guy to see who he was. And that's where, even in the trailer, we see it, that he shoots him repeatedly. We find out that he's an official or a high roller in one of the cartels, which then leads to the next scene where Josh Brolin character and his team kidnap the little girl, and they tell, I guess, her bodyguard, they handcuff him to the door saying, hey, we're from this cartel. This is what happens when you kill one of our guys. And they're basically planting that seed to start this war between the two cartels. So then we cut to another scene where Josh Brolin is reviewing the media coverage, and even the media is like, this is going to be the start of a new war, so be careful, blah, blah, blah. And then we find out that even though they left the bodyguards alive, when we see them in the newscast, all of them are dead. And so Josh Brolin's character starts reviewing all the drone coverage, all the media coverage to see just when and who killed these bodyguards to kind of track these people. And so in the meantime, we have Benicio del Toro with this little girl who is blindfolded. She's got headphones on so that she can't hear whatever. They have flown from Mexico City all the way to McAllen, Texas into this safe house, basically put the little girl in the bathroom. They're all still wearing ski masks. And then that's when they decide to put on their DEA uniforms and then stage a raid to basically gain this little girl's trust.
Yeah, they're trying to make it seem to her as if she actually was kidnapped by this other cartel. So they've got basically just this intense practical joke on her. They put her in this bathroom. They have somebody blow out the windows outside so she can't see them, but she can only hear them. But then they've got people shooting off guns and all of this. And it turns out, it's the DEA, and we rescued you from this cartel that kidnapped you. Wink, wink.
Yeah, and you can tell from throughout the whole time, the little girl, she's no fool. She knows that something's not right. Something seems a little out of place. And I don't know, for me, it just seemed like she knew that something was amiss, that something was not right.
Yeah, I think so, because it definitely sets up her character as being not really wise beyond her years, but she's definitely got a little bit of street smarts, especially because of who her dad is. So whenever the DEA, comes in and quote unquote saves her and they bring her to her safe house, she just kind of has, every time they try to explain something to her, hey, we saved you, we want to take you back home now. She's just got this look on her face what's the catch? What's going on behind the scenes here? Because this wouldn't just normally happen.
And I think that's the key point. I guess for her, it was if this opposing cartel was going to kidnap me, why would they fly me all the way to Texas?
Yeah.
one of her key questions as they're taking her back to this air base or wherever, she's like, "Am I in Texas?" And all of that just seemed a little out of place. And so then we cut to a scene where Benicio del Toro is talking to an insider in the Mexican government at a mall in McAllen, and they're just trying to be discreet, and they're in front of this Mexican chicken store, and this restaurant plays an integral part because it turns out that this restaurant, I don't know if Benicio was aware of it at the time or if these people were aware of it, but basically this is where that second storyline of the little boy, middle schooler, who we really don't know what's going on. This restaurant is the meeting point for these people to traffic human beings, and this is where they make the exchange and they hand over the money and stuff like that, which that was kind of weird. So Benicio del Toro and this Mexican official are talking about where exactly in Mexico they're going to keep this little girl, and just to kind of keep adding fuel to the fire between these two cartels, because apparently during this time that she's been here in Texas, there's been mass fighting back in Mexico. So then as they're leaving, you've got Josh Brolin, you've got Benicio del Toro and a couple of other agents in this little sedan, and as they're pulling out of the parking lot, they nearly hit this middle schooler that we've been following on a side storyline, and he just kind of hits the car and he gets very angry, and all these guys are just kind of looking at him like, bro, we nearly killed you.
It's dude, don't mess with us. You don't know who we are.
And at one point they even, turned on their sirens to let the guy know, hey, we're cops, get the hell out of the way. And he's looking at them with this furious rage in his eyes. I'm like, you're what, 15, 16?
Yeah, it's dude, you're 13 years old.
Get over yourself. Get to stepping, and it's just ridiculous. So he keeps walking, and then Benicio del Toro rolls down his window and talks to the little boy and says, "Hey, you better be careful when you're, crossing the street." And it kind of shows that softer side of Benicio del Toro that we haven't really seen in the original or this one as of yet.
Yeah.
So then we cut to another scene. You know, we've got this huge, what's the word? Convoy?
Convoy, motorcade.
Motorcade, that's the word I'm looking for. This is one of the parts that really drives me crazy. In the first movie and in this one, I have crossed the border multiple times, and let me tell you, the traffic is ridiculous. There is no way in hell you are going to get a single lane all to yourself. There's not.
You actually audibly when this scene happened, and it actually wasn't this scene. It was when the little boy and like his brother or his cousin crossed the border.
Yeah, because they cross into Mexico and they hand over their passports. You do not hand anything to the Mexican officials when you cross from the U.S. to Mexico. Let me tell you something, folks. Mexico doesn't care if you go into their country. They don't. Okay? When you cross the border from the U.S. to Mexico, and just for those of you who don't know, you're not traveling, hundreds of miles in the desert. No, it's like crossing a bridge. It's like crossing from Brooklyn into Manhattan, okay? Just minus the giant Hudson River or whatever it is that's underneath. I don't know New York well enough to say that. Arlene, I'm sorry, okay? Anyways, there's a very long bridge. You just cross right over, and when you cross into Mexico, there's a red and a green light, okay? And what you're doing is when you cross over the speed bumps, it's weighing your vehicle. And if it exceeds a certain weight limit, or, it's on random, then you get a red light and you cross into an inspection area. And basically what they're looking for is illegal stuff. But more importantly, they're looking to tax you on things that should be taxed, because especially in El Paso, McAllen, all these border cities, you have so many people that cross the border into the U.S. and go to like Walmart and Target and stuff. And on the weekends, let me tell you something, Walmart and Target, whichever ones are the closest to the actual border, are going to be jam-packed on Saturdays and Sundays and holidays. And you've got people that are loading trailers worth of toilet paper, food, toys, electronics, all this stuff that they're hauling all the way back to Mexico. Well, the Mexican government, they want their taxes on that. So a lot of these people are having to pay their taxes when they cross over, which is why they're weighed. There is no inspection point. There's not a place where you have to hand in your passport. They don't care. They just want their money. Now, on the way back, now that's a different story. When you cross into the U.S., yes, they will stop your car. You will have to turn in your passport. You will be asked who you are, where you're from, what you were doing in Mexico. They will ask you everything. And then they start checking your car. And if they smell something funky or they think something's wrong, then you get into secondary inspection. And let me tell you, secondary inspection is no fun. You're there for hours on end. And they will lift your car, and they will, if they still don't believe you, they'll put your car through x-ray. It's ridiculous. So these types of scenes really, really get to me. When you've got a convoy of 8, 9, 10, 12 cars that are gunning it at 60 miles an hour straight.
And there's just one lane that's open. Like, everything else is packed, and there's just like this one lane in the middle that's just conveniently open. Like,
I think it would have been a little bit more believable if they had placed officers along that lane, because what happens is when you're on the border and you're in line at these border cities like in El Paso and McAllen, Brownsville, all these other little towns, the radio stations here, like in the Dallas-Fort Worth, you know how you've got your traffic report? At these border cities, they've got the border wait times. El Puente del Libre, the wait is 30 minutes, which is never, unless it's like 5 a.m., okay? Usually the wait time is anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes even 3 or 4 hours. There have been times where I have been on the bridge, on the actual bridge, for an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's the worst. There was one summer that I was working for my dad, and I had to go back and forth. My entire left side was maybe 3 or 4 shades darker than my right side because my arm was getting sunburned just waiting. It's awful. So yeah, a scene like this really grinds my gears. It really gets me.
The scene where it's just the kid and like his cousin, like the little middle school kid is kind of like being initiated into the cartel in this movie. They're starting him off with like little responsibility, like you go take this money and go give it to this person, and they slowly build him up to be the person that like traffics people across the border. But there's just one scene where they're just cruising in his older brother or cousin's car. They just stroll up to the border. The dude just like flashes 2 passports, and then they just drive on their way because the guard like waves them through. When that scene happened, you audibly groaned and leaned over to me and said, "That's not how it happens."
They didn't even open the passports. If you're going to try to make this somewhat believable, A, you don't need passports to get into Mexico, and B, at least open them. It was ridiculous. Anyways,
I could almost say like that's like they could be stretching realism in that for the sake of the story, but like a scene like that I think almost takes away from the story, because the whole point is like they're trying to show like how difficult and how, like all these lengths that the cartels go through to bring people across the border. But then they show this scene where these 2 guys literally just stroll up to the border, show passports, don't even open them, and then they just go through. They're in and out in like 10 seconds. It's like, but if it's that easy to get in, how does the cartel need to do all of this stuff to get people in? It's just like that one scene, like it's one of those things I probably wouldn't have noticed, but like the second you pointed it out, I was like, oh yeah, that really doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Exactly. For someone like me, that to me was like, no, that's not the way it works. Okay. It's like literally there's a scene in Breaking Bad where Gustavo Fring and, they fly into Mexico and they're going to meet the drug cartel king. And then, they end up walking back. And one of the lines that Gustavo says is, there's 100 ways to get into Mexico without a problem. It's getting back. That's the problem. And yeah, it's true. Getting into Mexico is not a problem whatsoever. I have walked from one side of the border over into Mexico and been picked up in, it's nothing. It's getting back into the U.S. that's the hardest. Okay, so we do have a very strong border patrol. And, we're getting off on a side note here, but all these people who are complaining about the wall and Trump's wall and this and that, guess what, people? There's already a wall, okay? There's a huge gate there. It's clearly visible. I've grown up there, and there's a scene in a little earlier in the movie in McAllen where this little boy is with his mom or his grandmother, his aunt. He's at home. This is obviously where he lives, and his backyard is there, and right behind his backyard is this giant gate.
Yeah,
that's really what it's like.
Yeah, in the movie, the little kid lives like less than a football field away from the gate.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even a scene where his cousin, yells to people on the other side, and, they start making derogatory comments about the other person's cousin and that he wants to get with her, blah, 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 blah. That's really what it's like. You can really toss things from one side to the other. The Rio Grande is not that grand. It's not very big. But when it floods, and there is, you can have raging waters when it floods and when there is high water traffic. So that is real. Anyways, moving on.
Back to this convoy that we've been trying to talk about for like the past 10 minutes.
Exactly. This convoy is traveling from the U.S. to Mexico with the little girl. They are out in the middle of nowhere. Again, I don't know where these people decide, oh yeah, this is a great idea. Let's go ahead and meet out in the middle of nowhere. They've got helicopter coverage. They've got drone coverage. They're looking, every which way. And all of a sudden, the lead car in the convoy turns around and starts shooting at them. And they are betrayed, and they, basically they start shooting the entire convoy from in front and behind. Then all of a sudden, you've got the cartels on each side. The drones all of a sudden spot them. You've got missiles being launched and cars being exploding, and it's a very big action scene. And in retrospect, it's actually pretty early on in the movie. This movie was actually pretty long, but this action sequence was amazing. And then you've got the little girl who's just freaking out. She gets out of the vehicle and starts heading towards the desert. I guess they hadn't gained her trust yet. So Josh Brolin's character, obviously they all win. They kill all of these people, and they know they have to get back. They have to get back to U.S. soil ASAP. And so they're looking for the little girl, and Benicio del Toro's badassness is all like, don't worry about her. I'll find her. You go. And so this is, again, one of the scenes that just really gets me pissed off, because Josh Brolin's all like, you get me a lane. I don't care if you have to move cars. Anybody in our way, we're going to plow right through them. And then you see these, 5 or 6 cars just travel through one of the lanes. This is going to be the last thing that I say on this stupid border crossing that really pisses me off. Okay, this is going to be the last thing, I promise. When you're in line with bumper to bumper traffic and you've been in the same spot for over 20 to 30 minutes, okay?
There's nowhere to go.
If you see an opening, let me tell you something. I don't care if you have the patience of a nun. You are going to take that opening, and it doesn't matter if you're just getting ahead 10 inches. It's 10 inches that you haven't gained in an hour being in the same spot, okay? That is the only reason that it pisses me off, because I have been in those situations where it's like, oh my God, if this car doesn't move in the next 10 minutes, I am going to lose it, all right? If they would have had police officers or, something showing that they are keeping these cars out of this lane, that would have done it for me, and I would have been like, okay, that's a little bit more plausible.
But
all they had to do was...
It just shows them, and it's like, get us a lane, and then it cuts to the border, and there's just this convenient lane, like, opened up in the middle that they all just drive through to get back to Texas.
That's the one thing. All you had to do was ask anybody in El Paso, anybody in McAllen, anybody in any of these border towns, and they would have told you, oh yeah, all you need to do is have a cop. Rope! Cones! Something that showed why these cars weren't getting into this lane. Let me tell you, nobody cares. Nobody cares. If there's an open lane, you're going to take it. Because there have been instances where I have been at the very back, and all of a sudden you see the light turn green because a lane has just opened up. There is a rush of people just gunning it for that open lane. And it never fails. The first car that always goes through always gets secondary inspection, because they, in their thought, is you've got something to hide. That's why you're trying to cross so quickly. No, I'm just sick and tired of being in line for 2 hours, okay? Anyways, moving forward, after this huge battle scene out in the middle of the desert, this wounded cartel drug dealer person, soldier, and he's driving his truck and he's just trying to get away. He's very bloody. He's very hurt. And so then the little girl is coming up to a street and she sees this truck coming down. She doesn't know who it is, and she starts waving him down. The truck opens, the guy is kind of bloody, he comes out and he realizes who it is, and all of this is just a big coincidence. And so she now starts trying to run away. He grabs her, he's trying to put her in the truck, and all of a sudden his brains are all over the car. Benicio del Toro has saved her, essentially, from this person who's trying to kidnap her. This is kind of where the little girl starts to trust Benicio del Toro. She still kind of has him at arm's length, but, she's obviously in some state of shock after having somebody's brains blown all over her.
But she realizes that he kind of, saved her. But for her, it's kind of like, oh, well, one guy saved me, now I'm in danger with this guy or whatever. But at this point, they've been around each other, for probably a good half of the movie. And so she's kind of warmed up to him, because it's I think she realizes that since he's working with, I guess, the U.S. government, they have a different agenda other than let's kill her to, make the other cartel boss mad. I think she realizes that he at least wants to protect her.
Yeah, I don't think she's in on the plot of the U.S. government. I think she knows that something is amiss, but she's definitely starting to warm up to Benicio.
Yeah.
Just because of how long she's been with him, and he is genuine. He's trying to help her and protect her.
Because she's probably like, well, at least he had the decency to give me a bulletproof vest. I mean, who knows what this other guy was going to do to me.
Oh, yeah, because she ends up ripping it off in the middle of the desert. Those things weigh a ton, and she is this scrawny little girl in the middle of the desert. You're talking about 100, 105 degrees in the shade. For some reason or another, and Andrew, you may know this, I don't remember very well. For some reason or another, they get out of the truck. So they're driving in the truck, and then all of a sudden they're walking again in the desert, and they come across this guy in the middle of the desert who lives out there with his family. The guy, puts his hands up, and he's really scared because he knows that these are not people to mess with. And he keeps telling him, no, you're fine, you're fine. And we find out that this guy is deaf. Then we find out that Benicio del Toro can actually speak sign language, and we find out that Benicio del Toro speaks sign language because his daughter was deaf. And he kind of builds this relationship with this random character. So we're fast forwarding here. He asks this random stranger for food and water and shelter. And basically, the little girl and Benicio del Toro come up with a plan on how to get back to the U.S. It's common knowledge over there where these people need to meet in order to cross the border illegally. So Benicio del Toro tells the little girl, if for whatever reason we get separated or you get asked, you tell them that you paid me to pretend to be your father. And she even says, well, why do you want me to lie? Like, that's what's the point? He goes, well, because I'm going to have to lie too, and my lies are going to be very different, and at least this lie is one lie that we can tell together. And so this really comes into play a little bit later in the movie. So they're at this point where all these people are paying to cross the border. They pay their money, they get on the bus, they start, driving away. All of a sudden the bus pulls over, and all these people pull out their guns and they aim it at Benicio del Toro and this little girl, and they tell everybody to get off. Come to find out that this little boy that we've been following in McAllen actually spotted him and notified these people that, hey, this guy is with the U.S. immigration, he's a U.S. person, and, these guys are doing illegal stuff, so they're not going to take any chance whatsoever. And so this little girl's face has been on the news everywhere, and so despite the fact that she decided to cut her hair and pretend to be somebody else, they know exactly who she is. So they take Benicio del Toro, they handcuff him, they put the little girl in the car, and she tells the lie, I paid this guy to pretend to be my father. And then she's all like, they ask, does he work for your dad? And she goes, yes. And so that doesn't play out too well for Benicio del Toro. They take him out into the middle of the desert, and basically the initiation for this little middle schooler kid is to kill Benicio del Toro. Now, he is zip-tied behind his back. He's got duct tape all over his ankles. He's got a shirt over his face and duct tape all over his mouth so that he can't talk or anything. All of a sudden, this little boy shoots him, and that's the end of Benicio del Toro. This little girl has actually grown an affection for him. She starts screaming and crying. She's in shock that Benicio del Toro is gone. Now, one thing that we failed to mention is that because of the big battle scene that took place in the desert where the cops had betrayed the U.S. agents, all of that was caught on camera and leaked to the press. So now, the one thing that the senators don't want is bad publicity. And so when you see American soldiers shooting Mexican officials, that is not good for anybody. So they basically pull the plug on the entire operation, and they need a clean slate. So Benicio del Toro needs to be killed. The little girl needs to be killed. Anybody involved has to be killed because they cannot afford to have any loose ends. This is where we find out that Benicio del Toro was handpicked and trained for his position because she says, I can reach in a bag across the border and pick someone who's had their family killed by the cartel and train them. And so Benicio del Toro has been selected for this position that he holds, and he is the best of the best. Josh Brolin's character does not want to have to kill Benicio del Toro. He doesn't want to have to get rid of him, because he knows what an asset he'll be in the future for any other operations. In addition to that, they want to kill the little girl because she knows too much and she could end up saying the wrong thing.
He's
and
just
we
a
see
loose end at this point.
Exactly. The war is well underway, and it's just getting out of hand. Before Benicio goes and tries to sneak across the border, he actually gets in contact with Josh Brolin, and Josh Brolin explains to him, like, hey, they're pulling the plug, it's over, you need to get rid of the little girl. And this is where we see a softer side of Benicio del Toro, and we really see that he really genuinely cares for this little girl. So we're jumping back and forth here, but to make a long story short, Josh Brolin's character and, this little military group they're on these choppers on their way to Benicio del Toro because he has a tracker on him, and they're seeing this all play out, and they see that Benicio del Toro's been killed. And Josh Brolin makes the comment, I'm just glad it wasn't us that had to do that, because I don't think I could have. So then at this point, Josh Brolin's just over it. He's like, that's it. Send in the drones, kill everybody. This is it. So they stop these cartel people in their tracks. They have them put up their hands, and they end up killing everybody. And Josh Brolin has a change of heart and says, you know what, we'll put her in witness protection. And so they grab the little girl, and they're like, that's not the way that this is. She's a loose end. And he's like, I don't care. I don't know if he's trying to push his agenda at any point, or if he truly just feels, because of the conversation that he had with Benicio del Toro about this little girl, that he's kind of doing it out of respect for Benicio del Toro. Obviously, Benicio del Toro was going to extreme lengths to protect this little girl. He's obviously seen a lot of his daughter in her, as she was killed by the cartels, and this little girl was raised by the cartel. And I feel like this is just Josh Brolin's way of paying his respects to Benicio del Toro, because you can see that they've worked together.
I think so too, because if it weren't for that relationship that those two characters have, the way they present Josh Brolin's character, I would have no trouble believing he would be perfectly cool with just letting this girl die because she is a loose end. And so I think, for me, his character, I don't think it's like he has like a change of heart. It's like, oh, we've got to protect this girl. It's kind of like more like, I owe my friend. Like, I'm glad I didn't have to be the one that had to kill him, but protecting this girl from the cartel was really important to him. And the U.S. government just kind of screwed us over by cutting ties with everything. So it's like, at least I can do this one thing for my friend I almost had to kill.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we cut to a scene. We see Benicio del Toro's body, lying in a pool of blood and everything, and suspend disbelief, all of a sudden he starts moving again.
He's alive!
Right?
He's alive!
So we find out
After
that the little...
getting shot in the face.
Exactly. Well, the thing about it is, even when they shot him originally, okay, in my head I was thinking, well, that's not where his brain is. It looks like they shot him in the cheek.
It very distinctly shows you whenever he gets shot like in the jaw or whatever, but it's still at like point blank range, and so he, falls over dead. And so as an audience member, you're kind of like, oh crap, they just killed Benicio del Toro. But like in the back of your mind, it's like they didn't kill him. He's not really dead. And so when his body starts moving, for me, I was kind of like, yeah, I was right. He's not dead. But at the same time, it's like, they're really asking me to suspend disbelief. Like, he's been out here because they shot him like in the dead of night.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
Whenever he's waking up, it's like the next afternoon. So he's been like sitting there in a pool of his own blood for like at least 8 or 12 hours. And he just like gets up and he frees himself. And so it's just like the movie, you're asking a lot of me, movie. You're asking me to believe that he was alive this whole time and he didn't die. But like,
with his mouth covered in duct tape, his face in a shirt, very difficult to breathe, and he was probably coughing up his own blood.
Yeah, he was probably choking on his own blood, but like at the same time, it's like I can be angry with the movie for asking me to suspend that much disbelief, but at the same time, I can also be like, well, realistically, that could happen. He could have gotten shot in the face and not died.
And he's a badass.
Would he have been able to just like walk up, like brush it off, be like, oh crap, I got shot, but I've got shit to do. Like, would he be able to do that? Maybe, maybe not. He's a badass, so we don't really know.
Yeah,
so it's like this and a little bit, I'll go into it a little bit more later once we finish talking about like the story. But like right here is like really where the movie lost me. And it's probably the main reason for me that it's an 8 instead of a 9. But this, whole thing where he was dead, but now he's not really dead. It was just kind of like, you're stretching it, movie, you're stretching it.
Now, one thing that we failed to mention, so after he's been quote unquote killed, right? All these drug dealers take off. They're all patting this, little kid. They're patting him on the back. He's doing such a great job. And he kind of has a come to Jesus moment where he's like, this really isn't what I want to do. And he jumps out of the car and decides to walk in the middle of the desert, walk back to the border.
Kind of have his own little moment of reflection, like, oh, I can't believe I've done this. I just killed
somebody.
All these guys are like, yeah, you did it. But he's just kind of like, I gotta be alone for a minute, which ends up saving him.
Yeah, because all those guys end up dead. But he ends up walking back to the border. So once he's back at the border, they say, hey, no, you don't go in this one. You go over there. They're waiting for you. And then we cut to a scene where he's getting into a minivan with this white woman who has a baby in the back.
Mom.
Yeah, just total soccer mom. And she says, if you can find me a job that makes as much money and that's easier than this, I'll take it. And
which I thought was so cool. Like, just that little moment shows how far reaching this whole drug cartel and just like this business that they have of trafficking people reaches, to where like they've got like this soccer mom on payroll to just sit there and pick people up.
Absolutely. It's scary how realistic all of this is.
Yeah.
So then we cut back to the scene where Benicio del Toro's in the desert. He ends up, breaking loose and ripping off the duct tape and stuff. And he is obviously very dehydrated. He's lost a lot of blood. And he comes across, as he's walking through the desert, he comes across all these dead people that his buddy Josh Brolin had just killed, minutes if not hours before. And so he gets into the car, he starts driving off, and this was one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie.
It was so awesome. Like, I was just laughing to myself, not because of how ridiculous it was, because it's just like, it's so fitting for this character to do
yeah.
that. It was so awesome.
As he's getting into this, car with all these dead people, he starts pulling these dead peoples out of the car. He's obviously very weak, and he's doing the best that he can. But even in this state, he knows he has to be able to defend himself. So he's grabbing as many weapons as he can. And a lot of these people are carrying, assault rifles, grenades, knives, and stuff like that. So his instinct is to survive. So he gets into this car. He's driving in one direction. And all of a sudden, this other car that's coming in the opposite direction starts flashing its lights. So you can obviously tell that they know each other. And he just keeps driving. He's going to completely ignore it. So then this car, you can see in the camera, it busts a U-turn and starts coming after him, and he is getting ready. As this car is getting ready, what he's doing is he's with one hand on the steering wheel and one hand he's grabbing a grenade, pulls the pin, he waits for the car to get up as close as they can, and he literally just tosses the grenade into the car. Just like hot potato.
Like, it's such a badass moment, because it's not like he's like preparing himself for battle and it's like, oh, these guys are gunning at me and I got to do whatever. It's almost like these two dudes that are chasing him down are just kind of like a mild inconvenience, and so he just like tosses this grenade into their window, like it's
because
like,
they had taken a couple of shots at him and they missed. I don't know how you miss at point blank range.
At that close, yeah, at that point they're like right next to him or whatever.
They're right next to him, because he didn't fling it. He didn't, put any effort. This guy is losing tremendous amounts of blood, so he is very, very weak. He literally just
tosses it in there. It's just like, go. I've got more important things to do than deal with you guys right now.
It's like he was tossing them change.
Yeah.
I mean, it was ridiculous, but instead of quarters, he tosses a frag grenade. So then these two guys are, freaking out. They're trying to get the grenade. They don't know what's going on. They're putting down their guns, and boom, the car explodes. And he just keeps on driving.
Just couldn't be bothered. Just like,
yeah,
I got things to do.
And what's really interesting about this next scene, and I don't know about you, I want to get your insight on this. He's driving off the road. He's obviously very, very weak. He drives off the road and he crashes into this post out in the middle of the desert, because there's tons of land out there. This is true. When you drive in Mexico, you've got a lot of landowners, and so they have these posts with barbed wire to keep the cattle in. My grandfather had a cattle farm. And so he's kind of just, there and he can't move. He's just so weak. He's so tired. And to me, I really think that Benicio del Toro was contemplating his own existence. Like, maybe I should just end this. Maybe I can just die right here and just put all this behind me and join my family, my wife and my daughter. Because the whole plot, the whole premise of his character is to get revenge on the cartels for killing his family. And so to me, he's just kind of taking a moment like, okay, it's all over. Like, maybe I should just die here. And in his badassness, he's like, no, I still need to get revenge. So then he backs up and he keeps on driving.
So yeah, I think I could definitely see that. For me, cynically speaking, I almost want to say that it was just like another fake out moment.
Okay.
Because for a second, especially whenever he got shot, there's like a good stretch of like 20 minutes of the movie where you think he's dead until, he comes back, frees himself, and decides to be a badass with the hand grenade later on. If this scene where his car just kind of swerves off to the side, if that were where he were to meet his end, that would have been an appropriate setting for his character to end. Like, he's just had this one last badass moment, but then he just kind of veers off the road and slowly bleeds to death, dehydration or whatnot. That would have been okay with me. Like, I would have been like, okay, we've seen his character from beginning to end, and this is where it ends. The story's pretty much done. there's nothing else for his character that has to be done. But he's not dead yet, so let's just keep going.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and wrap up here, because this is one of the final scenes. They show him, he decides to survive, right? And he drives, and it's kind of like the vehicle is driving off into the desert, right? And we cut to a scene where this little boy, this McAllen kid, is now walking through the mall back to this chicken place, and he is riddled with tattoos. And I remember, because you and me were looking at each other like,
wait,
what the hell? Like, what is going on? How did he get so many tattoos so often? And literally, like, maybe 10, 15 seconds later, it says 1 year later.
1 year later.
It's like, oh,
it's like
okay.
They faked this out again. They put a delay on the title card because, yeah, that happens. And we both just kind of looked at each other like, wait, like, what's going on or whatever? And,
yeah, because you think that it's literally like a day later or a couple of hours later or a day later.
Yeah,
and what's funny is you even heard it in the theater, because you heard other people kind of like,
what's going on?
Because this guy's completely tatted up. His hands, his neck, it's ridiculous. His hair's all slicked back.
Because, yeah, there was no, like, fade to dark and then fade back up on the picture. It's like you see Benicio del Toro just kind of driving off into the distance, and then it just cuts to a shot of this kid just walking through the mall like nothing happened. And it's just kind of like, wait, what's going on? And then 1 year later, it's like, oh, okay, there we go. Time has passed.
Exactly. So then this kid walks into the back office like he normally does to get his pay, whatever he does. As he opens the door, the office is empty, but who's standing there? Benicio del Toro, badass as always, in this nicely tailored suit. Benicio del Toro has some of the best style I've ever seen. I would love to emulate that type of style. So kudos to the stylist on this movie. And so he tells the boy to take a seat, and they start talking. And this is kind of where the movie was great. It was a good ending. I would have thought of something better. And so let's talk about what happens. He tells the little boy to sit down, and he says, so you want to be a Sicario? Let's go ahead and talk about your career and your future. And then the door shuts, which to me, that was a very corny ending to a very good movie.
Yeah, as far as I know, they haven't announced anything yet. I think they're waiting to see how well this one does at the box office. But for me, it was a deliberate setup for a sequel, which I hate it when movies do that. I hate when a movie is made with the presumption that a sequel will be made, because that means like the first movie becomes part one and then you're waiting for part two to come out. Whereas, with this movie, when the first Sicario came out, there was no implication of a sequel, to the point where whenever they announced this sequel, it almost kind of pissed me off. But then, hey, it actually ended up turning out to be a great movie. But now with this movie, it seems like they are deliberately setting it up to have the this story continue into a sequel. And for me, I'm just kind of like, why would you do that? Because now, if they make a sequel, they have to match what happened in this one in terms of like quality, performance, writing, all of that stuff, which most of the time sequels never really do that. Every once in a while, you get a movie that has a sequel that is better than the original or as good as the original, but by and large, sequels just aren't as good as their originals.
Absolutely.
And so
this movie was a standalone movie. You didn't have to see the first one to understand where you're at, End on a high note. I probably would have ended with the little boy opening the door, seeing Benicio del Toro, and him saying, let's talk about your future, and then having the door shut. Because then you don't know what they're talking about. And it's left to you, your imagination or whatever. Does he kill him? Or does he give him an anatomy lesson and say, hey, look, this is the human head. The brain is up here.
There are
bullet here. That's where you end.
There are literally two fleshy parts that aren't connected by bone. All you have to do is not shoot those, and you're good.
Or, another way that could have ended great is, the little boy opens the door, sees Benicio del Toro, and then credit scene, because you don't know what happens.
See,
but with him having that little dialogue, it was awful.
Yeah, I could almost see it like the kid opens the door, sees Benicio del Toro. If that's where the movie ends, then the sequel can go in any which direction they want to. It could be he's like, the little kid couldn't be in the movie at all because Benicio del Toro decided to kill him, or he could be taking him under his wing and learning the ropes of how to be a Sicario and like all of this stuff. The sequel, if they plan, which I think they do, plan on making one, could have taken any direction they want, but with that line of dialogue that they end the movie with, they're almost solidifying the direction that they want to take. And for me, it's just kind of like, all you had, like you were saying, like, just take that line of dialogue out, and you could have done exactly the same thing that you wanted to do for the sequel. It just would have been, like, more interesting. It would have been a surprise, because we're not sure what direction they want to go in.
And there wasn't even that much dialogue, but it's amazing to me how little dialogue and how little scene, what a small scene can do to, you know, a movie. It's interesting. Basically, that does it for Sicario, Day of the Soldado. I'm going to go ahead and stick to my hard 8 movie rating for this one. Definitely worth it to go see it in theaters. I really enjoyed it. The only thing that's taking away the 0.5 for me is that border scene. You have no idea how much that scene really bothered me.
It's funny, like, little things like that bother me in movies too, because everybody kind of, like, has their thing that they know a lot about, and they know, like, more than just, like, your average person about. And so, like, something like that never in a million years would bother me.
Just so that I can put it into perspective for you, Andrew, that's like driving in Dallas and not running into construction.
Oh, yeah, that's
how unlikely.
That's not happening.
Exactly.
Welcome to Dallas. The roads have been under construction since 1965, and they're still going.
Well, if you go back to the first one, they even stopped. They were stopped on the border because of the traffic.
Oh yeah. Oh, and they have one of
the huge
most
battle
intense
scene. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that scene was so intense.
Just FYI, that bridge that they were crossing on in the first one, that is like maybe 5 or 10 miles from my grandmother's house. So I've crossed that bridge a million times. So after talking about it, what do you think?
I'd probably still stick with my 8.
So overall, we're giving it an 8 score. That's going to do it for this edition of GOAT Movies, Sicario, Day of the Soldado, rated R, 2 hours long, great movie. Andrew, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
No problem. Thank you for having me on. Anytime.
Absolutely. And is there anything you'd like to plug? Any websites, anything for your company, your production company?
Oh, no. I mean, we got me and some friends. We have our own production company. It's Negative Apples. So we've got negativeapples.com. We're really not too active. We just kind of do our own freelance stuff and whatever. But I guess if in the future, if we got something interesting going on, I'll have to come back. We'll talk about another movie, and then I can shamelessly plug in my stuff at a later date.
Negativeapples.com. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. If you have any comments about the show, if you'd like to be a star on the show, be sure to shoot me an email over at goatmoviespc@gmail.com. That's goatmoviespc@gmail.com. Remember to like this episode, comment below, and to share it. Subscribe and tell all your friends about it. Really appreciate you being on the show, Andy, and we look forward to seeing you guys at the movies next week.